This is an extremely unusual project. I was asked to look at this documentary about Deep Space Nine, seeing as how I've talked about the show a lot over the past 16 or so years. Now, I can't really review it, as that's kind of pointless in this case. I guess the approach I'm going to take is whatever this brings to mind, that's what I'm going to talk about. And I won't mention everything that comes up in this, but rather whatever feels like it's something I should perhaps mention. There's no hard and fast rules to this thing, and a whole lot of it is just my reactions to it. Think of it as those An American Reacts To videos, except you can't actually see me. It's more about what I say. So yeah, this video is not really for anyone who wants to know about that special. You should just go watch that special as far as I'm concerned. This is effectively what the show prompts me to say while I watch it. So with that, let's begin. Right from the start, there's one Max Grodenchik singing a Vic Fontaine appropriate song about the show before then leading to the title, which of course is derived from the final episode, What You Leave Behind, which in turn is based upon a phrase attributed to Pericles. What you leave behind is not what is engraved in stone monuments, but what is woven into the lives of others. In retrospect, it's especially fitting. DS9 was a consistent, high-quality program, which took chances and challenged Star Trek preconceptions. Yet the show does not have the pop culture osmosis of Star Trek, or The Next Generation, or even that of Voyager, what with Captain Janeway and Seven of Nine. The occasional thing like Vreenak declaring something a fake comes along, and there's always little bits and pieces of the show that are elsewhere, like Section 31 or the Jem'Hadar. But by and large, DS9 just doesn't have any monuments in our culture. Instead, it's found a place in the hearts of those who gave it 7 seasons to weave something unique and special. Seeing the title and its declaration is like seeing an old friend finally, even if for only one moment, get the recognition they were usually denied but always deserved. After that title, Andrew Robinson, aka Garrick, interrupts the space battle to make note, in a Garrick way, that documentaries are stories, and stories change with time, from objective fact to personal recollection. And said in a way that makes clear if Robinson read you The Hungry Caterpillar, it'd sound like a kaiju film. After reading some hate mail about the show, Ira Stephen Bear, essentially the showrunner for all of DS9, spoke of how they thought it'd be a big hit like TNG was, but it wasn't. Comments with Trekkies, well, doesn't really help. Views that without exploration, the show wasn't just Star Trek. Well, let's stop a moment and actually consider that assertion. This is what I mean when I say it's about where I decide to take things. You're along for my ride here. If you don't like it, again, go watch the special. It's probably better than this anyway. So, let's challenge that assertion. What are considered some of the best TNG episodes? All Good Things, Best of Both Worlds, Yesterday's Enterprise, Inner Light, Tapestry, Darmok, Measure of a Man. I'd say that's a fair representation. What do these classics have in common, though? Character. Without the stakes of Data's case for self-determination, what would Measure of a Man be? Without Picard learning we are shaped as much by our shame as by our triumphs, what would Tapestry be? What separates the apocalyptic threat of the Borg in Best of Both Worlds from being just another brainless special effects popcorn flick? The way it puts the crew, and especially Riker, into a crucible they've never had to before truly see what it is they're made of, when they are no longer comfortably in control in their lounge-like superior firepower ship, but instead being the last hope of averting an Armageddon served by someone who has them completely outclassed. Be honest with yourself and ask, how many of the great TNG episodes were about boldly going, and how many were about boldly being? TNG, at the very least, was not at its best exploring space. It was at its best exploring oneself. And you don't need to visit a new planet every week to do that. After discussing Avery Brooks both as coming in as Sisko as well as a director, the band gets back together to talk about what they do. Bear, Renee Echeverria, Hans Beimler, Robert Hewitt-Wolf, and Ron Moore. And considering how awful I am with names, the fact I didn't have to look any of those up Well, that's quite an impression to have made on me. They talk about what they would be doing if right now they were producing Season 8 set 20 years later. They discuss Captain Nog on the Defiant dealing with a pursuit by a cloaked ship shooting at them, escaping through the wormhole to see Deep Space Nine there. Later they address that it has to do with the Sisko situation, and they think DS9 is a pilgrimage site now, and Kira's not the station's commander in a military sense, rather she's a Vedic, and O'Brien's Dean of Engineering at Starfleet Academy. Molly is in Starfleet on DS9. Worf's on Kronos with Martok. Jake's writing novels. Ezri's captaining a ship, and Bashir's the medical officer. They're married. Quark's been passing out invitations to everyone. Jake deletes his without reading it, but there's a white field all over the Celestial Temple, so he arrives. The bait and switch is that it seems like they're going to be here to see Sisko, but it's actually because Vic is dying. Except that's a bait and switch too. It's Nog who needed them all to come and arrange this, catching up to where they opened, only for the Defiant to explode. Andrew Robinson later calls up to complain about this development. Many character discussions follow this, leading to discussing the makeup, and interestingly, to Mark Alamo complaining that he felt like he wasn't supported enough as an actor for the performance that he was bringing to the role. It's interesting considering how the character very quickly was far more than just a villain, and had to indeed be yanked by the writers because it was feared the attempt to make him more ambiguous was encouraging apologism for Ducat's oppression. Beer makes the argument that writers tell actors how much they love them by bringing them back again and again. I realize I probably shouldn't bring up this, especially with Deep Space Nine, but I'm reminded of how Wayne Alexander became a constant presence on Babylon 5 for the same reason. Always a new part because of his performance. Like I said, this is me talking about what comes to mind. Who knows where it's going to take me? I sure as hell don't. The writers make the point about Kira and Odo's relationship, that it wasn't something they were looking for. They followed where the actors were bringing the characters. The looks between them that this deep friendship was evolving into feelings beyond friendship. It illustrates the collaborative process that goes beyond consultations between the people who are putting together the ephemeral aspects of a show and those responsible for making it manifest. A two-way street that allows for each side to build upon what the other is bringing, which creates a nice feedback cycle because the sides, well, all have to elevate each other's games. The topic next turns to the lighthearted matter of terrorism. Okay, this is your final warning now. This video is about me talking about what comes to my mind when I watch this show. If you don't have any interest in that and are still watching 8+ minutes into this video, you got no one to blame but yourself. Okay, terrorism. The point is made that in the 90s, you could get away with having a character who was an unapologetic terrorist like Kira, which you couldn't after 9/11. In the U.S., as Siddig alludes to, before that, terrorism was something that people elsewhere did to other people elsewhere. So it didn't have the same emotional association that came after the Twin Towers fell. Well, let me buckle in for this part. It's my view that Trek's nature as a program made it a poor vehicle for handling political matters. I'm not saying they shouldn't bring up social issues. What I'm saying, though, is that there is simply not the space for things that are nuanced, which politics really, if you are intellectually honest, have to admit it's not simple. Before you fill up the comments about how wrong I am on that it is very clearly black and white, when I say politics, I mean immigration, criminal justice, social security, the deficit, tariffs, energy independence, the environment, overseas interventionism, housing, the gig economy, healthcare, drugs, federalism, farm subsidies, our relationship with China's human rights trampling government, poverty, going to the moon again, bureaucratic mission creep at the CDC, the IR fucking S, and whether parts of Oregon should be allowed to secede and join Idaho. I'm not talking about choosing between Angry Orange and Lloyd Bridges in Hot Shots Part 2.
Looks like we've got a saboteur.
That's your wife, sir.
Huh? Yeah, so it is.
Very often, though, in fiction, it's got to be the problem would be solved if people just realized this is good and this is bad. Except that's not true. Usually, it's an area where both have problems, and for X, the benefits outweigh the negatives, and for others, it's the reverse. So instead, having, no, the good people like this, which will achieve a new outcome, and the bad people support the bad thing, well, that's easy drama. But, well, the thing that comes to my mind is a recurring skit in the radio show That Mitchell and Webb Sound. It's called Big Talk, where this exuberant host has gathered very smart people together to demand the solutions to complex problems, but only wants them immediately and simply. And it's funny because these are problems that clearly can't be solved immediately and simply. Yet television narrative requirements have so conditioned us that you're not allowed to actually respond to the hero's plan with, no, actually, that's not going to work. But we're so conditioned by the idea of what is right and what is wrong from that challenging that idea gets all goofy. If you suggest some plan that is supposed to magic away homelessness is fundamentally flawed, people won't take away that, yeah, if this were so simple a fix, it'd already be fixed. And there are numerous complex realities that any genuine solution is going to need to face and overcome, or else all you're doing is engaging in hollow, feel-good busy work. However, if you actually say that, you just hate the homeless, I guess. We all know it just takes a bunch of boffins around a table and a British man shouting at them, and homelessness would be over forever. Now, caring is fine, but this all we have to do is X is not what a solution looks like. No. That is what a solution looks like. It's not about saying the right words right now. It's about supporting and or doing the right thing now, and next week, and next month, and next year. But you can't show that in a 1 or 2 hour largely self-contained show. Hence, the problem with politically themed episodes. In the end, the answer isn't going to be any kind of answer at all. But because it's politically charged, you can't actually point that out. Or it seems like it's a politically motivated disagreement rather than an actual practical issue that you don't want people freezing to death under bridges in the winter. I bring that up because later on they go on about past tense. Anyway, the problem with Kira's terrorism isn't the timing so much as it was made at a time when simplicity and not nuance and complexity were acceptable. DS9 was willing to tackle things, don't get me wrong, and got into the complexity a lot more than others were willing to do at this time. But in the end, all Trek could really do is acknowledge a problem. You can fly in and solve an alien society's underlying issues and fly away because fictional beings with fictional problems can be easily solved by a fictional solution. Kira needing to fight against decades of brutal exploitation and oppression and using terrorism as a means for that fight, well, that's far more closer to home. At the time it came when the audience could buy her sentiment that she shared with Damar. If they are not fighting with you, they are fighting against you. Even your own people are. Nowadays, such absolutism about the shedding of innocent blood, it's not going to go down so easily. A happier topic, Garak. With an intro that surprises me by saying that he's now the most popular Cardassian, but while in the air that was Gul Dukat, I mean, wow. Personally, me and my circle all loved Garak. We had a running gag that at the start of each episode the tumbling asteroid was going to hit the station. As each name came up during the credits then, you would see their frozen body twirling through space, and Garak would zip by in this teeny tiny little pod, apologizing that there just wasn't room in there for a second person. As far as we were concerned, Garak was the only one who saw shit coming. His part is all too brief, though if anyone particularly enjoys hearing Garak drop F-bombs, watch Andrew Robinson read one of the letters while being incredibly amused by it. Another of those little things are looked at, including Wallace Shawn talking about, for the first and only time in his career, actually falling asleep on camera from the long hours. But all too quickly we get to the foe. DS9 needed their own adversary, and that was the Dominion. To avoid risk, don't make them one race, make them three races. The warrior race, the face, and the shapeshifters who are in charge. In a sense, they were the established TNG recurring forces. Klingons, Ferengi, and Romulans. Those who live for the fight, those who come with smiles to con you, those who pull strings and hide in shadows. Incorporating three into one adversary was a smart move, as it avoided the Planet of Hats issue of other Star Trek powers, even if one might say it was three hats. The idea that no one race was the Dominion meant it wasn't just about each group, it was about the interactions between the groups and the tensions that were there. The effectiveness of this approach may have contributed to a similar idea with the Zindian Enterprise, which likewise created a collection of races with their own dynamics and agendas. In such situations, you're dealing just as much with the internal relationships as you are with the group as a whole. Continuing the return to DS9 with Act 2, the Major in charge, Palak, thinks it's just an accident, and the gathered friends speculate on things like Nog was just trying to make a big entrance, and it backfired, rather literally. But Molly says they are remembering him as a kid and a cadet. She knew him when he was a captain. Whatever happened, it was for an important reason. Worf, the diplomat, says that according to the Treaty of Whatever, Ezri has the right and duty to investigate. But we see that Kira seems to have her own agenda in this. She speaks to the science officer to ask that all things he finds pass to her before to Ezri. This officer is Jake's half-brother, Joseph Yates Sisko. This leads to a point that honestly hadn't occurred to me, so I'm pleased that it came up. I always knew that Jake was on the show as a vehicle for his father, rather than as his own character. This is a captain who is also a parent. Kirk, Picard, Janeway, Archer, Pike, none of them were married or had children, at least not while they were on the ship or anything, and Sisko was a widower and a parent. The idea that Sisko made it such an essential part of his life to be a father and parental figure, to the point he even considered leaving Starfleet behind, was setting an example that this black captain prioritized that relationship and that responsibility, that he knew how important it was for a growing young man to have a father figure in his life. Lots of talk is made about the characters as role models, inspiring to go into STEM and believe in possibilities, and I don't want to diminish that. But to serve as a role model about something universally applicable and vitally important, that was significant. And they're rightly outraged that DS9 was out there with representation and being passed over because it's science fiction, because this isn't the dirty present day, but rather a utopian future. And the only possible compliment I can see in that is that the presence of diversity in Star Trek was so taken for granted that the fact there were constantly scenes consisting only of people of color was unremarkable, that this is what is to be expected. As I've said elsewhere, the problem I've had with Voyager at times is that the writers just didn't seem to trust the fact that the audience would take a woman captain seriously. The fact of the matter is, though, Ben Sisko was always taken seriously, and it wasn't that his race wasn't relevant. Rather, the approach was that it was simply a part of who he is. Many things were a part of who he is. He's a father, and he never stopped being a father, even when Jake wasn't in the room. He was a widower, and he never stopped being a widower, even though his relationships may not come up. These things all mattered, but they didn't apply to every scene. Likewise, his race and the fact that he came from New Orleans. They all matter too, when they matter. It's not that the rest of the time they don't, so much as they are, along with everything else, part of the tapestry that makes him who he is. To say, all of these things don't define me, but they all help shape the person that I am. They never stop being that way. Oh, before we move on from the race topic, it's not mentioned in the documentary, but it's such an interesting bit of trivia I thought I'd share it. The black security officer who appears throughout the first 2 seasons of DS9 was played by Kevin Graveau. I believe that's how his name is pronounced. Why is that important? Because this guy would go on to create the Blue Marvel over at Marvel Comics, also sometimes called Marvel's Black Superman. Act 3 of The Return of DS9 is about the investigation. Bringing back Odo is toyed with, but ultimately shelved. The investigation will be handled by Ezri. She sees the Starfleet crew of the station are concerned because Nog and Kira had a huge fight, which she never mentioned. Kira says it's not relevant, and says it's time for them to leave. Worf, as a Klingon diplomat, beams down to the Bajoran caves where he finds Garrick, who shows an image of Jem'Hadar before Kira, because they have converted to the Bajoran religion. It's down to Worf to make use of this information, knowing he may very well be in hostile territory. The subject naturally turns to bringing Worf on the show, and the way many of the cast felt threatened by such a move. Guest star is one thing, but to become a permanent member of the cast, especially with the hope of boosting ratings, naturally meant that he could overshadow the others. Dorn mentions, though, that the two favorite Trek episodes he ever had were on DS9. It's easy to see why, as despite there being so many regulars and recurring characters over there, the show is very much about the dynamic between characters. In TNG, if there was a Data episode, or a Crusher episode, or a Riker episode, the rest of the cast wouldn't vanish. But it was all about the character at the front. Involvement from others was usually to propel the character down the track that their storyline was. DS9 would very often have even a Worf or Dax or O'Brien episode include at least one, if not more, of the other main characters for them to play against. This past week I put up a number of DS9 episodes, and I didn't select them for any particular relevance for this, but they do kind of illustrate this. We have the dynamics between Odo and Weyoun during a defection, the dynamics between O'Brien and Bashir while Jem'Hadar are prisoners, the dynamics between Kira and Dukat on two separate missions, Worf and his conflict with Odo, and reevaluating things with Sisko. While TNG often revealed through obstacles, DS9 would often reveal through relationships too. On that subject, let's turn to Terry Farrell, who is participating and voices her frustrations she'd had at the time that she wasn't being listened to, and having people around who were being dismissive of her. I admit to being sad to see her go. I know in my show I sometimes am exasperated with her, but my exasperation isn't like what it is with other characters on other shows, where it's, would you just go away? It's more like, would you stop being such a dick? I know you're better than that. Going back to Act 4 of The Return of DS9, Bear speaks with pride about planting the seed that Bajor was supposed to join the Federation and never doing it. The Bajorans essentially played a reverse Uno on them. No, we're not joining the Federation. Your commander is going to become our god. So Section 31 is going to be involved, declaring war on the Bajoran religion as an obstacle to their goals. Destroying the wormhole would not only deal with that, but also ensure nobody else comes through that thing to challenge our dominant position in this quadrant. Call in Rom, State Funeral, Secret Investigation, Joseph and Jake, and Busted are all on the whiteboard for this, with Joseph telling Jake that Section 31 killed Nog because Nog was on to their plan. Act 5 is a confrontation between Bajoran security and our heroes. Kira is forced to choose which side she's on, and chooses her friends. And just when it looks like it will come to gunfire, a white light and Sisko appears. And not just here, but in many places at once, too. And that's to be continued, but in your own imagination. The doc ends with Shimmerman, Grodenchik, Biggs, and Combs singing a lovely song about the show that was actually written by Max Grodenchik. Afterwards, during the titles, we get trolled when the greatest moment in the show's history is declared to be Al Moraine from Move Along Home. So, we've reached the closing credits of this documentary. What do I have to say about it? I'd say overall, what we left behind is a love letter to a show that deserved far more love than it had gotten. And hopefully, it's going to get far more now that it is available to be streamed. So, great. The future is finally caught up with where the show really would have thrived better. So good. The more people who appreciate this, the more they'll see the possibilities that are out there as far as good quality science fiction television could be. And that brings this weird experiment to the end. I hope you've enjoyed 25 minutes of this spinning blue sun and me rambling about whatever comes into my head. I recommend this documentary if you like Deep Space Nine, and if you don't, I have no idea why you've been listening to 25 minutes of me talk about it.